Yeah, we're gonna need some backup. Yep. Lethal Weapons 2024 is officially in the books. I have survived. I did not get DQ'd. More importantly, the president has also survived with the excellent protection of Squad 202. That's right. I went as a Secret Service agent, and the other guys did not get the memo. But that's okay, because today we're going to talk about what did people bring out to Lethal Weapons, how was the experience, and more importantly, what could we learn from it? I placed 38 out of 88. Of course, I shot iron sights in the event. And division-wise, I placed 6 out of 25. But don't worry, I'm not going to go stage by stage today, but rather I want to go through two major categories, equipment and tactics. Equipment-wise, what did I use? Obviously, the SP5K PDW or MP5K PDW. Excellent piece of kit, no jams. We'll look at what other people use, and we'll look at what other problems some people ran into. And on top of that, I want to talk about the outfit, the LARP that I did, which is Secret Service. How did my Greyman and Company suit work out? How did the MP5 concealment rig work out? What were some issues that I ran into, and what were some good things that I saw from the kit? Now, second part would be the tactics and the strategy on how to shoot the match. We're going to bring Josh in for that because, of course, Josh is a multi-state title holder, Grandmaster class USPSA shooter, and I am a washed-up Army officer who has not shot a match for 15 years. And so I'm glad I didn't get DQ'd. Let's look at the equipment starting off.
Blunders, tell them how the IRA! You just drown out my audio.
Equipment-wise, of course, this was going to be an MP5 fest. I said it before we got there, and a lot of people used MP5s. It is a good firearm. It is a good subgun. As far as the MP5 crew goes, I think most people are fairly happy. It's just whenever you ran into magazine issues. The MKEs tended to work just fine with H&K or MKE mags. Still, it goes back to the adage that I do think MKE MP5s are kind of like the Wasser of MP5s. And of course, when it comes to H&K, specifically Rodrigo, who dressed up as Chapulín Colorado, a Mexican superhero, running an MP5 full size and then later on an MP5 KPW like mine, no issues running with H&K magazines. I know Aiden, who gave Donald Trump the teardrop tattoo, he was running a Zenith, and his Zenith for some reason would have failures to eject on the first few rounds of every mag. That is a serious issue, but he still plays first in the division, so good on him overcoming some of those things. And then we had some that were just question mark builds.
Whoa. Oh, wow, that's awful.
Stop! Did anything get that
Yes. Hey.
The best performers out there with the least amount of issues were the H&Ks. Specifically, when you used H&K magazines. That is going to be one of the key things that I see. There were some guys who were trying to use the AC Unity 40 rounders, like Kai, and absolute heartbreak. Just terrible. Those things jammed on him every single round, would not feed. He went back, just used his MKE mags, had no issues. The other thing, when it comes to the selection between full size and K and SD, well, you're not getting an SD because it's going to outperform the rest. The SD is going to be the handicap, but is going to be the coolest piece of kit of the MP5 world. But when you're talking about, let's say, the full-size system, I'm just using the MP5 SD to illustrate, the full-size system versus a K system, your full-size system is going to be a lot easier to manipulate. So using a full-size system with a fixed stock, that was probably your best bet for easy and fast manipulations if you wanted to shoot an MP5. If you wanted to shoot a K, it's just fine, especially without optics. The one issue is you're running into a lot more spring tension on cocking the firearm, which you have to do every single time you load a magazine. We don't have to do, but instinctively I've drilled myself to do that every single time. So be cognizant of that one particular issue. The other thing is too, when you're running full stocks with a full size, it's fairly balanced. You can run around fairly well, and the MP5K PDW, the stock sort of also works that way, to where I could run around with a decent amount of balance on the stock, because a lot of people don't realize how heavy the KPDW stocks are. With ammunition loaded, the balance point was probably right here at the ejection point. Again, 30 rounds loaded in, and it would shift farther back as you fired it. Now, what other guns did we see? James over at Hub City, he was shooting an H&R 635, which is a Colt 635 copy. James absolutely burned everything down, shot extremely well. Although he and I both had one failure to fire each, strange thing with the ammunition, we received a lot of duds, and it was across a lot of different shooters too. So James had a failure to fire, he just wrecked it and continued going. I had a failure to fire, I completely stripped the mag and reloaded a new mag and continued on, and that was the only malfunction I had through the day. And it was ammunition related. And then Zach over with Brandon Herrera, his Vz61 also had a primer. Basically, it was also a dud. Hammer dropped and the primer did not fire. So Zach's theory on this is that we've been having primer supply issues and maybe the QC is not up to snuff. I don't know that for a fact. I mean, that is a theory. I don't know. Zach, I was worried about him running 32 ACP or 7.65 Browning. No issues, really. He was able to knock down the plates fairly easily. The other guys, let's see, Nick was running the Uzi because of course it's an open bolt Uzi. He was running it in semi. You'll see some stages they require you to strip the mag out, fire one shot to clear the chamber. For Nick, of course, his bolt is backwards, so he has to fire the shot and then strip the mag out. So he had a slight advantage over the rest of us who had to strip the mag out, fire to clear the chamber before we proceeded. Nick could just stand there and continue to fire. If he missed, continue to fire and then strip it out at the very end. So a weird advantage for open bolt guns in that perspective. And then of course we had a Tec9 out there that did not work extremely well. One of the firing pins died, and yeah, so I would say maybe the Tec9 would not be an A, B, or C tier gun to shoot a match like this, but plenty of drip factor to it. On that note, what about LARP?
Oh, no, give me the Durgas. Give me the Durgas. Good.
Oh, it's not finished. I told you. I was gonna take my time right here.
So of course, I came as the Secret Service. And so my suit was from Greyman and Company, a company that is used to making sort of bespoke security detail suits. Specifically, if you just look at the suit, like if I wore just a suit with nothing underneath, it almost it feels like it's a little bit too wide, but it's made for concealing things. It's made for you to be able to have shoulder holsters or 4 o'clock inside the waistband holsters on your belt. With a holster, it feels phenomenal. And also with just handguns, you can put your suit jacket on and you barely see anything. So they know what they're doing. The other thing is the suit had this action back that I'd never seen on any other suit before. And that little action back allowed me to do a lot more wider ranges of movement with my suit on. Without the action back, I probably would have ripped the jacket, to be frank. But underneath, I had my MP5K concealment rig, which is it kind of looks like the Uzi rig back in the day when Ronald Reagan had Secret Service protect him when he got shot. And the MP5K PDW rig was, of course, originally made by Eagle Industries, and this one was a DeSantis copy. The rig ran fine, but don't try to actually conceal an MP5K PDW underneath it. It looks ridiculous with an MP5K PDW clipped underneath. That said, I basically use it as a mag carrier. It definitely wasn't the fastest, but I was able to not clip it and just use a Velcro to secure the magazines, and that's not really an issue. I also had my earpiece and my radio, and that was, I wasn't talking to anybody, but let's just say I lost comms the first stage whenever I was running. You'll see the radio dangling by my foot. So if I were to actually carry a radio in the field, which I wouldn't be using a Baofeng with the organic clip, I would be probably using an actual, like a real radio with an actual carrier, to where it wouldn't just clip off of my belt as soon as I ran into the slightest bit of action. But as far as a LARP goes, this was the year. This was a year to do Secret Service, and that's why, even though I felt that the MP5K was a little, it's not bland, but in an environment like this, it's almost a little bland because everybody is running MP5s. I felt that was pretty on point with the current atmosphere, because of course 2024 right now, as of the publishing of this video, we are closing up election season, so there was plenty to talk about. Donald Trump going into election season and surviving multiple attempts on him.
See this little guy? That's what we call a pass-through target.
When I get back from here next week,
Yeah?
lateral damage.
Okay, so A+ on the guns, A+ on the outfits. Got it. Henry knows his gun nerd stuff. How exactly was the shooting, right? So let's go into the tactics and the training and all that, and let Josh kind of roast me a little bit on some missteps that I'd taken.
No Russians. No Russians. No Russians.
Okay, before we go into the hard roast, I will say Josh did an excellent job pushing me to relearn some of the things that I forgot as far as just the core competition style shooting. I did not get DQ'd. That is always a plus. But on top of that, it's not difficult shooting an MP5 at these distances. Even in iron sights, as long as you practice and you learn where your hold is, you can see my particular MP5, I'm running the night sights. And what you do is you zero the tip of the optic at 25, and then the dot in the middle, you just put it on top of your target and it should hit exactly where that dot is. And that helps you then overcome any height over bore issues when you're talking about 0 to 10 meter targets. Now, past 10 meters, like 15, 20, you're going to have to do a little bit of work there. But it's not that much work. You're going to get 2 on brown, no issues. Recoil sensation is easy, especially once I cleaned up some of the things that I was working on. What I learned through all this is that the shooting matters almost the least. As long as you can shoot, as long as you're able to operate the firearm, no issue. The delta between being able to shoot it and being able to run a stage clean, it comes down more so on the mental and the strategy side, which, when it comes to someone who has trouble following rules, well, Josh, why don't you take it away? We are here with Josh. We had been talking about a lot of equipment, but I think much more than equipment, it was the soul of the game, which Josh is well acquainted with the game. I am not well acquainted with the game. I am the shooter, but I do not understand the game as well as Josh does. So, ask Josh to look through some of the footage of the match, kind of do some deep analyses on it, and bring up a couple points. Josh, what? Oh, this is gonna be great. What did I screw up on the most?
All right, so I want people to understand that you screwed up on a lot of stuff, Henry.
That's great.
Okay, a lot. In all seriousness, given you hadn't shot matches in over a decade, and that most of your training and most of your time on range and skill development is actually been orientated towards distance shooting, I actually think you did really well. Like, I was pleasantly surprised with where you finished, and somewhere in the top 10 in Iron's PCC, right? So
I did not get DQ'd. That was point number 1. Do not get DQ'd.
Yes. Okay. Yes. Don't DQ. These are important features, right? I thought you did really well, ultimately, in terms of how you placed and everything else. But for the purposes of trying to really look at this and provide some context to people who are watching it, and things that maybe some people who even like competition shooting might be able to take away from this.
If I go back next year, how do I slay? Josh is trying to help me.
So I'm gonna cook a little bit here.
All
Stop me if I start saying stuff that you don't really understand, okay? Or that doesn't make sense, or you're like, wait a minute.
I mean, you've got a few bullet points that you want to, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 type of things that you can talk about.
So number 1, and some of this you're not going to be able to see from footage, but I got it talking to you about the match, debriefing, giving me your AAR of what took place. I think you spent a lot of time thinking about gaming elements of stages that really didn't matter at all, and that use of your time, effort, and bandwidth took away from gaming the really important elements and the things that are immediately within your control. So, as an example, on the bike stage, you were telling me about how you had this intricate plan of like how you're going to wrap this bike chain up, and it's like, yeah, okay. Or like just wrap the bike chain because it's a bike chain, and like you just wrap it. Like, because there's only so many ways to do this effectively, and like, what are we doing? Like, just wrap the bike chain.
Well, and to that point, I actually did get dinged on wrapping the bike chain, because the way I thought I was gonna game it, he was like, no, not gonna happen. Continue. So
So we'll get into that in a second, which is a separate issue altogether, okay? Don't conflate things, Henry.
Okay.
Even if you had wrapped it like, and like whipped this thing around and like hooked it on perfectly, like, okay, fine. That's an element of gamesmanship of a part of the stage that really, in my opinion, it's not worth spending any sort of horsepower on. Instead, there are examples of, and I'm going to use the barber stage as an example here, the barber shop, okay? You did a standing reload behind the table where you picked up your gun, and then engaged paper targets from there, even though you told me they could be engaged from anywhere. So instead of picking up the gun and doing the reload as you were moving downrange, clearing all of that extra space where you were doing the reload, you did a standing reload. That's the type of gamesmanship you should be paying attention to. You went to the middle shooting position out of 3 linear shooting positions, and you ended up then traveling more ground than if you had just started at the left or the right shooting position and then gone middle and then the other final shooting position on the end. And these were things that were like very obvious to me of like, well, you literally just took more steps than you had to, right? You moved through more positions.
It's when you told me I was doing questionable things through that string of text messages.
That's right. Hey, Josh, look at how good I done did.
I did not say that. I knew I had certain things that I messed up on. But yeah, okay, so basically being able to identify certain efficiencies and execute upon those efficiencies properly.
Yeah, well, and which ones are relevant? So I'll give you one more example. There were 2 instances that I saw on the stage footage where you were required by the rules to remove the magazine and then fire your final shot at a target, score a hit before you proceed. Right? And if you miss that target, you literally have to reload the gun, like standing in that spot. On both of those stages, right, which target was the most important target on the stage?
It was that one.
It was that one.
Right.
And yet you missed it once. It was like a 10-yard open C-zone target, and you missed it.
Yeah, because in my mind, I was like, all right, this is an easy one. I'm going to do this, and then we're going to go. And then I did this, and then we couldn't go.
So, again, when we talk about applying effort and bandwidth and horsepower, think about yourself as a processor in a computer, right? Like, you're maxing out, right? You're trying to play COD on 4K, all right? You're maxing out. You have to know which areas to really hyper apply that focus to. It's like making that shot is the most important thing on that stage. Okay, we're going to make that shot. How you stuff the substance into the bag that you were picking up, probably not the important part. It was probably hitting that target with the first shot. So that's where I'm going with point number 1.
So when you go through these stages, do you basically identify this is the key shot that I need to focus on making? So does your mind start prioritizing the key shots?
You could. It depends. In USPSA and in 3-gun, like in my world, there aren't too many examples of something that's like this, where there's a forced unload and then shoot, although I understand that is a thing in other types of matches. But there are shots, like there's an offhand steal at 80. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply the horsepower there on levels of confirmation, and I'm going to increase my confirmation level on like the plate rack at 80, because I know that every time I take a makeup shot, that's going to crush me on my time, right? So I'm going to be hyper specific about which level of confirmation I'm using. In other words, how sure I am that my sights are settled and I'm getting a hit, for example. Or, whatever it is, right? Whatever that piece is. If it's the last shot in my magazine, right? If I'm shooting shotgun and it's like, this is the final round in the tube, I have to hit this. Yes, I'm paying more attention to that shot. And the way that I pay more attention is I ratchet up my level of confirmation, meaning I'm more sure about my sight position. And I'm consciously aware that I'm doing that if I know that one of these things is like the last shot in the mag, or it's a really, really difficult shot on the stage, or the one that I'm really paying attention to. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Point number 2. Henry ain't gonna follow no rules.
Well, I mean,
Henry doesn't follow the rules. Henry doesn't know what the rules are. Henry doesn't give two craps about the rules. He won't do what you tell him, okay? Yeah, so, Henry, there were numerous examples of, like, again, a lot of this comes back to processing power, that processing power conversation, where I'm seeing you do stuff, and it's like, there's this very obvious immediate thing that you have to do as part of the stage, like you gotta take your mag out before you run into the trailer, right? Or you gotta pick up the money bag off the poker table, or in order to activate the swinging target, and whatever it is. And even using that one as an example, the money bag off the table, I asked you, could you have just taken it right at the beginning of the stage and thrown it down range next to where it was and had popped it on it when you got there? And you said, well, I didn't think you could, but then people did. So you didn't know whether or not the number of times you wrapped the chain around the thing was sufficient.
well,
No, you didn't even know 100% what the penalty was for missing a target. How many seconds did it add to your time? You weren't positive when I asked you about it. So these are some of the very basic things from a rules perspective before the stage even starts, off the clock, that I would be determining and figuring out so I know what I can and can't do. And that will help me inform my planning and inform where I apply that horsepower, that processing power.
so they ask you a question before every stage. Do you understand the course of fire? And you do say yes. And I did say yes. But apparently I lied.
It's true. Yeah, so like, it's important to craft a good plan about how you're going to attack the stage, but in order to craft a good plan, you also must know what the rules are about how to make the plan, right?
Okay.
What the rules are. And so that then the downstream portion of that is things like, again, back to pay attention to the important things on bullet point number 1.
So the downside to that, I mean, it's outside of I forgot to do that task. It's worse than that in my opinion, because then I realize, oh shit, I need to do this, and I have to double back and add more time to do it. Or
Right.
in the case of one of the other stages, I straight up did not pay attention on where I was supposed to go, and I missed like 3 targets. Like, not shooting, I missed it. No, I forgot those existed. And then at the very end, I was moseying around like Joe Biden looking for ice cream. I was protecting Trump, so I can make Joe Biden jokes. And I straight up had like multiple failures to engage on one of those stages, and that's because I forgot that I had to do the thing to.
So
continue.
even as a follow-on to that, there was a stage where you knew you missed a target. You weren't positive which one, but something didn't feel quite right, and you're like,
I'll tell you why I realized that, because I realized I still had like a lot of ammo in the mag and I didn't reload, and I was like, oh, I still have a lot of ammo.
Even in that instance, there were numerous problems, right? Problem 1 was you didn't have a good stage plan to make sure you got to all the spaces. Problem 2 was, or if you did have a plan, you didn't execute on the plan. So one of those two things.
Right.
And then problem 2, though, was understanding what the rule was for missing. Was it 10 seconds? Was it a minute? What was it? Because you took something like 13 or 14 seconds to like figure it out from the time you shot your last shot till the time that you shot like the real last shot. Mm-hmm. If it was only a 10-second penalty, then it was actually better to have just not even shot it when you realized what happened, because it was over 10 seconds that it had elapsed, right? So there's even stuff like that where it's like, again, there's some gamesmanship to this to some degree, right? But those are some of the examples that I can think of.
Yeah,
so,
that was my most disastrous stage of all of them. But the interesting thing is, you remember there's that one stage with mines? Well, there were clay pigeons on the ground, and basically if you stepped on one, then like you took a procedural, like 5 seconds. For that one, because I was being very gingerly and not stepping on them.
Deliberately,
Yes.
You were being deliberate.
Yes,
in
I was
everything.
correct.
Right?
Yeah,
so
there
like
you go,
your
yeah.
movement, your positioning, your everything was deliberate.
Yes, and so that one I think I was overall second.
It's pretty good. I mean,
for the
watching
entire
that
match.
stage, I can see it. Like when you get to the position, like there's a bunch of stuff I could still critique on that, but when I'm watching you like flow through that stage and move through the stage, you're very deliberate about your positions that you're setting up on the balancing beam boards. And you're like, it looks good. Like it looks good. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, he's not having to shuffle around and move and things like that, which leads me to the next bullet point, Henry.
Okay.
Which is these next two. So I gave you two like sort of more fundamental gamesmanship, match theory stuff. These are just technical. So the first one is choppy, non-fluid movement. There's a lot of like, I'm in this position, I'm looking at the target, but my gun's not up, and it's still like here. Okay, now the gun is up, and I'm there, and I'm shooting, and then like I'm over confirming after my last shot goes off, like I'm still kind of like there. Then I break the gun down, and I mosey over, like shuffle, scoot to the next position. It's not particularly explosive, and it's also not flowing, right? Like my gun's not back up and ready as I'm stepping into that position. No, it's sort of like some weird hybrid that's the worst case of both worlds. Either explosive and aggressive, where your gun might not be quite ready, but you're getting there really fast, and then the gun's right behind you, or you are moving a bit slower, but it's very, very deliberate, and the gun is ready the second that the target becomes available. You kind of did like the worst part of both of those. Like you were a little bit slow getting there, and then the gun also wasn't ready. Okay. And that sort of, I noticed that on quite a bit of the engagements. There was one stage, the Tombstone stage. That one looked really, like that was a USPSA stage. Like that was the closest example of like a direct USPSA stage. And even there, in that type of a stage, all of the movement, like my gun in that stage would have been almost up the entire time, like up and on target, where I'm sort of like looking just over the sights as I'm transitioning, or through the sights as I'm transitioning, or whatever else, and maybe break it off me once, maybe going from the window around the corner. But aside from that, the rest of it was all like so close. Everything was gun would have been up and flowing through that entire stage. There was a lot of like shoot, take one step into the next position, shoot, take a shuffle step to the next position, shoot, and very choppy. So if you just isolate the window portion of that stage, you had to move like 3 separate times to get each of the targets. Mm-hmm. Instead of you could have just flowed forward into the window, taking the shots that you could see that were available as you were getting there, finished out what was in there, and as you were leaving that position, be on the last target, and then immediately be transitioning over into the next array around the corner. So that's the type of stuff I'm talking about.
What do you do to train for that? What do you do to get better at that?
You know, a great example of that particular skill set is when we were out training with X-Ray Alpha and the Surefire gang, the bar hop drill.
Okay.
It's a really, really basic drill. It requires 2 targets and then 1 line on the ground. And it's just doing that where you're flowing across the targets and as you're also moving and taking that one step. It seems super simple, but for whatever reason, it's a challenging enough drill. And it's a great example of something that you can do at a rudimentary level to start working this into a training sequence.
I remember Matt was that the one where he was talking about sort of unpinning the torso to your legs, to where your legs would be doing stuff, so. And your top is kind of unpinned and doing top things, and then your leg is still moving around, right?
It makes sense. Yeah, I don't remember that specifically, but yeah, I could have just been drowning at the moment anyway.
I mean, we all were. There's a lot of information, but anyways. All
right, last piece then, and I'll leave you with this: reloads. Reloads are one of the most important things in a match, right? Because they are time spent on the clock when you're not actually doing the shooting, right? We want to mitigate the amount of time where we are in a position to shoot, but we are not shooting. So we have to do reloads. Everybody has to do them. So it's about placing them at the appropriate portions or positions during a stage such that you are doing them while you're doing something else, i.e. moving. So again, going back to the barbershop example, you pick the gun up, you have the mag in the hand, you had to move downrange anyway, you might as well have done it while reloading, right? And then you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone, 2 non-shooting tasks completed in the time that 1 could be completed, right? The secondary or the carryover piece of that is there were a few where you had planned your reload in the right place. It wasn't a standing reload. It was like, in fact, I think it was Clay Pigeon stage, the minefield stage, where you had planned a reload as you were moving into that final position to shoot the double spinning star. And as you were going there, you were doing your reload, but you outran the reload. So like you got there too quickly, and the result of that was doing a standing reload, or at least a partial standing reload. So I'll give you an example of what we used to, a good example of what we would do differently. So back in the old days of 3-gun, like when I was first getting into it, when we were actually still shooting together in college, we would shoot the shotguns, tube-fed guns, and then this was the days of the we can reload, right? This was like the old, like the Noveski guys, like Rob Romero teaching the we can reload, for those of you who remember who that is back in the day. It was like 6 to 8 seconds to do a we can reload like that.
On a shotgun.
Right. It was the stuffing 1 round at a time, like grabbing 4 in your hand and manually stuffing them. Not the stuff today where they quad stack it and they can load like 8 rounds in sub 4 seconds, which is wild. In that time period, when we were doing that, and you had to move from one position to another, it did you no good to like hustle to that other position while you're fumbling around trying to load the gun. It made more sense to just be calm, focus on the load, and then if you're done before you get to the other position, then you can do a little hop, skip, and a jump to get there quickly. So in certain instances where you're like trying to run through the battery of arms to like lock open the bolt, strip the mag, get the next mag in, close the bolt, like there's stuff going on there. It's not as simple as a basic AR reload, like out and in. I would say being a bit slower and more deliberate as you're getting to that next position will actually end up being better, because by the time you get there, you'll be up and ready to shoot. And you're probably losing something when you're doing a load, trying to be quick doing it instead of just doing it calm, collected, and while you're doing like a general flow movement forward instead of like really busting and trying to hustle there and like, So those are the 4 primary takeaway bullet points, Henry. I hope that the audience finds that constructive.
No, so just before we drop off of the reload topic, though, it's interesting because the MP5 reload is a lot more involved than some of the other stuff. Now, I will say, a lot of people will say the MP5 reload is going to kill you in the streets.
Everyone with that reload and MP5.
Of all the guys who shot MP5s, which we only had 2 or 3, actually we had 4 in our squad who were not using MP5s, the rest were. So it's like a good 6 to 8 people using MP5s. The core motion of the MP5 reload was really not an issue, but you're right, I did see a lot of standing reloads with the MP5, whereas the guys who were the James Hub City, who was running his AR9 a lot faster, and then so that helped him on the reload as he went, because his delay between that was a whole lot less. So much less so that people had problems with a physical reload, but I would say more so on the efficiency. To your point, they had to work that into a movement a lot more. There was more that you had to work it into a movement, right?
Makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. Again, like there's a lot of finite nitty gritty. We could go through every stage and try to pick apart like very basic, like, minute stuff. But I think on the general, like on the whole, this is a good representation of some large sweeping elements to focus on or to be thinking about for when you go next year.
So next year, hopefully, now that I've kind of got a baseline, shooting I felt like was not really as big of a concern. I know I placed a lot of focus on the shooting element before. Frankly, looking back at it, the biggest one out of the 4 that you brought up that I felt that I needed to really double triple down on is following instructions. Like the failure to understand the course, follow instructions, and then follow my plan. That whole thing of being able to follow instructions really, to me, I felt like it really added a lot of time to it. And less so, I had less of an issue of, can I hit the target? Yes, you can hit a 5 to 50 meter target with an MP5K pretty easily. Even the reload.
Well, what I'll leave you with, Henry, because this is an important point to sort of take away from what you just said, because it's very true. One of the reasons to shoot PCC division in competition is because the shooting is not challenging for the most part. It allows you to build skill in other areas, like stage planning and following the rules and whatever it is. That is an area where I translated in my own shooting. I translated shooting PCC actually made me better at matches with where I placed with pistols.
So this is why I have you as my co-host, because when I am failing to follow instructions, Josh is usually the one right next to me. Like when I'm shooting practical accuracy, Josh is annoyed that I would have shot the wrong guy, etc., etc., etc.
That does happen a crap load, dude.
Yeah.
All right. Take it away, Henry. I know you're going to give the people some more news and detail on gear and other elements of what made this cool.
Thanks, Josh.
Yeah, that's as far as the ATF says, that's the only one in the country. So,
Cancel.
oh,
Hail to the chief. That's funny.
And so that was it. This was a fun match. This was something that I would like to do. This may not be something that is purely what Josh or hard competitors like. But as far as people who want to go out there and have a good time, but not just blast things in the trash and still want to work on some of the skill-based stuff, this is a decent venue. Huge props to Clay and Tony and the guys over at Dissident on putting this on. I did not get to shoot the rifle side this time. Maybe that's a thing that I'll get to shoot next time. But as far as my time getting to spend on the subgun course, I had a great time kind of reliving some of my former life and redeveloping some of those skills that I'd forgotten. And now that I have one under my belt, maybe next time I can use some more eclectic firearms out of just an MP5K. I know. The MP5K is pretty rad, but I want to bring weirder stuff out. So, we'll see you on the next Lethal Weapons, maybe. Let me know what you thought. Let me know what you would have brought in the comments section down below. Until then, I'll catch you on the range.
This is Steel Night 6, 4 Vix, 8 packs, REDCON 1, green to green. How copy, over?